There is a certain country where a king is never allowed to reign while a queen can be found. They like queens much better than kings in that country. I can't think why. If some one has tried to teach you a little history, you will perhaps think that this is the Salic law. But it isn't. In the biggest city of that odd country there is a great bell tower, higher than the clock tower of the Houses of Parliament, where they put MPs who forget their manners. This bell tower had 7 bells in it, very sweet-toned, splendid bells, made expressly to ring on the joyful occasions when a princess was born who would be queen some day. And the great tower was built expressly for the bells to ring in. So you see what a lot they thought of queens in that country. Now in all the bells there are bell people. It is their voices that you hear when the bells ring. All that about its being the clapper of the bell is mere nonsense, and would hardly deceive a child. I don't know why people say such things. Most bell people are very energetic, busy folk, who love the sound of their own voices and hate being idle. And when nearly 200 years had gone by and no princesses had been born, they got tired of living in bells that were never rung. So they slipped out of the belfry one fine frosty night and left the big beautiful bells empty, and went off to find other homes. One of them went to live in a dinner bell, and one in a school bell, and the rest all found homes, they did not mind where, just anywhere, in fact, where they could find any bell person kind enough to give them board and lodging. And every one was surprised at the increased loudness in the voices of these hospitable bells. For of course the bell people from the belfry did their best to help in the housework, as polite guests should, and always added their voices to those of their hosts on all occasions when bell talk was called for. And the 7 big beautiful bells in the belfry were left hollow and dark and quite empty, except for the clappers, who did not care about the comforts of a home. Now, of course, a good house does not remain empty long, especially when there is no rent to pay, and in a very short time the 7 bells all had tenants, and they were all the kind of folk that no respectable bell people would care to be acquainted with. They had been turned out of other bells, cracked bells and broken bells, the bells of horses that had been lost in snowstorms, or of ships that had gone down at sea. They hated work, and they were a glum, silent, disagreeable people. But as far as they could be pleased about anything, they were pleased to live in bells that were never rung, in houses where there was nothing to do. They sat hunched up under the black domes of their houses, dressed in darkness and cobwebs, and their only pleasure was idleness, their only feasts the thick dusty silence that lies heavy in all belfries where the bells never ring. They hardly ever spoke even to each other, and in the whispers that good bell people talk in among themselves, and that no one can hear but the bat, whose ear for music is very fine, and who has himself a particularly high voice. And when they did speak they quarrelled. And when at last the bells were rung for the birth of a princess, the wicked bell people were furious. Of course they had to ring. A bell can't help that when the rope is pulled, but their voices were so ugly that people were quite shocked. "What poor taste our ancestors must have had," they said, "to think these were good bells." You remember the bells had not rung for nearly 200 years. "Dear me, said the king to the queen.
"What odd ideas people had in the old days. I always understood that these bells had beautiful voices."
"They're quite hideous," said the queen, and so they were. Now that night the lazy bell folk came down out of the belfry full of anger against the princess whose birth had disturbed their idleness. There is no anger like that of a lazy person who is made to work against his will. And they crept out of the dark domes of their houses and came down in their dust dresses and cobweb cloaks, and crept up to the palace where every one had gone to bed long before, and stood round the mother of pearl cradle where the baby princess lay asleep. And they reached their 7 dark right hands out across the white satin coverlet, and the oldest and hoarsest and laziest said,
"She shall grow uglier every day except Sundays. And every Sunday she shall be 7 times prettier than the Sunday before."
"Why not uglier every day and a double dose on Sunday?"
asked the youngest and spitefulest of the wicked bell people.
"Because there's no rule without an exception,"
said the eldest and hoarsest and laziest.
"and she'll feel it all the more if she's pretty once a week. And," he added, "this shall go on till she finds a bell that doesn't ring and can't ring and never will ring and wasn't made to ring."
"Why not forever?"
asked the young and spiteful.
"Nothing goes on forever,"
said the eldest bell person,
"not even ill luck. And we'll have to leave her a way out. It doesn't matter. She'll never know what it is, let alone finding it."
Then they went back to the belfry and rearranged as well as they could the comfortable web and owl's nest furniture of their houses, which had all been shaken up and disarranged by that absurd ringing of bells at the birth of a princess that nobody could really be pleased about. When the princess was 2 weeks old, the king said to the queen,
"My love, the princess is not so handsome as I thought she was."
"Nonsense, Henry," said the queen. "The light's not good, that's all." Next day, it was Sunday, the king pulled back the lace curtains of the cradle and said, "The light's good enough now, and you see she's—" He stopped. "It must have been the light," he said. "She looks all right to day." "Of course she does. A precious," said the queen. But on Monday morning His Majesty was quite sure really that the princess was rather plain for a princess. And when Sunday came and the princess had on her best robe and the cap with the little white ribbons in the frill, he rubbed his nose and said there was no doubt dress did make a great deal of difference, for the princess was now as pretty as a new daisy. The princess was several years old before her mother could be got to see that it really was better for the child to wear plain clothes and a veil on weekdays. On Sundays, of course, she could wear her best frock and a clean crown, just like anybody else. Of course, nobody ever told the princess how ugly she was. She wore a veil on weekdays, and so did every one else in the palace, and she was never allowed to look in the glass except on Sundays, so that she had no idea that she was not as pretty all the week as she was on the first day of it. She grew up, therefore, quite contented, but the parents were in despair.
Because, said King Henry, it's high time she was married. We ought to choose a king to rule the realm. I have always looked forward to her marrying at 21, and to our retiring on a modest competence to some nice little place in the country where we could have a few pigs.
And a cow, said the Queen, wiping her eyes.
And a pony and trap, said the King.
And hens, said the Queen. Yes, and now it can never, never be. Look at the child. I just ask you, look at her.
No, said the King firmly. I haven't done that since she was 10, except on Sundays.
Couldn't we get a prince to agree to a Sundays only marriage, not let him see her during the week?
Such an unusual arrangement, said the King, would involve very awkward explanations, and I can't think of any except the true ones, which would be quite impossible to give. You see, we should want a first-class prince, and no really high-toned highness would take a wife on those terms.
It's a thoroughly comfortable kingdom, said the Queen doubtfully. The young man would be handsomely provided for life.
I couldn't marry Belinda to a time server or a place worshipper, said the King decidedly.
Meanwhile, the Princess had taken the matter into her own hands. She had fallen in love. You know, of course, that a handsome book is sent out every year to all the kings who have daughters to marry. It is rather like the illustrated catalogues of Liberty's or Peter Robinson's, only instead of illustrations showing furniture or ladies' cloaks and dresses, the pictures are all of princes who are of an age to be married and are looking out for suitable wives. The book is called The Royal Match Catalogue Illustrated, and besides the pictures of the princes it has little printed bits about their incomes, accomplishments, prospects and tempers, and relations. Now the Princess saw this book, which is never shown to princesses but only to their parents. It was carelessly left lying on the round table in the parlour. She looked all through it, and she hated each prince more than the one before, till she came to the very end, and on the last page of all, screwed away in a corner, was the picture of a prince who was quite as good-looking as a prince has any call to be. "I like you," said Belinda softly. Then she read the little bit of print underneath. Prince Bellamant, aged 24. Wants princess who doesn't object to a christening curse. Nature of curse only revealed in the strictest confidence. Good-tempered, comfortably off, quiet habits, no relations. "Poor dear," said the Princess. "I wonder what the curse is. I'm sure I shouldn't mind." The blue dusk of evening was deepening in the garden outside. The Princess rang for the lamp and went to draw the curtain. There was a rustle and a faint high squeak, and something black flopped onto the floor and fluttered there. "Oh, it's a bat!" cried the Princess as the lamp came in. "I don't like bats." "Let me fetch a dustpan and brush and sweep the nasty thing away," said the parlour-maid. "No, no," said Belinda. "It's hurt, poor dear." And though she hated bats, she picked it up. It was horribly cold to touch. One wing dragged loosely. "You can go, Jane," said the Princess to the parlour-maid. Then she got a big velvet-covered box that had had chocolate in it, and put some cotton wool in it, and said to the bat, "You poor dear, is that comfortable?" And the bat said,
"Quite, thanks."
"Good gracious!" said the Princess, jumping. "I didn't know bats could talk."
"Every one can talk,"
said the bat.
"but not every one can hear other people talking. You have a fine ear as well as a fine heart."
"Will your wing ever get well?" asked the Princess.
"I hope so,"
said the bat.
"but let's talk about you. Do you know why you wear a veil every day except Sundays?"
"Doesn't everybody?" asked Belinda.
"Only here in the palace,"
said the bat.
"That's on your account."
"But why?" asked the Princess.
"Look in the glass and you'll know."
"But it's wicked to look in the glass except on Sundays, and besides they are all put away," said the Princess.
"If I were you," said the bat, "I should go up into the attic where the youngest kitchen maid sleeps. Feel between the thatch and the wall just above her pillow, and you'll find a little round looking glass. But come back here before you look at it."
The Princess did exactly what the bat told her to do, and when she had come back into the parlour and shut the door, she looked in the little round glass that the youngest kitchen maid's sweetheart had given her, and when she saw her ugly, ugly, ugly face, for you must remember she had been growing uglier every day since she was born, she screamed, and then she said, "That's not me! It's a horrid picture."
"It is you, though,"
said the bat, firmly but kindly.
"and now you see why you wear a veil all the week, and only look in the glass on Sunday."
"But why?" asked the Princess in tears. "Why don't I look like that in the Sunday looking glasses?"
"Because you aren't like that on Sundays," the bat replied. "Come," it went on, "stop crying. I didn't tell you the dread secret of your ugliness just to make you cry, but because I know the way for you to be as pretty all the week as you are on Sundays. And since you've been so kind to me, I'll tell you. Sit down close beside me. It fatigues me to speak loud." The Princess did, and listened through her veil and her tears while the bat told her all that I began this story by telling you. "My great 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 grandfather heard the tale years ago," he said, "up in the dark, dusty, beautiful, comfortable, cobwebby belfry, and I have heard scraps of it myself, when the evil bell people were quarrelling or talking in their sleep, lazy things." "It's very good of you to tell me all this," said Belinda, "but what am I to do?" "You must find the bell that doesn't ring and can't ring and never will ring and wasn't made to ring." "If I were a prince," said the Princess, "I could go out and seek my fortune." "Princesses have fortunes as well as princes," said the bat. "But father and mother would never let me go and look for mine." "Think," said the bat, "perhaps you'll find a way." So Belinda thought and thought, and at last she got the book that had the portraits of eligible princes in it,
and she wrote to the prince who had the christening curse, and this is what she said: Princess Belinda of Carillon Land is not afraid of christening curses. If Prince Bellamant would like to marry her, he had better apply to her royal father in the usual way. P.S. I have seen your portrait. When the prince got this letter he was very pleased, and wrote at once for Princess Belinda's likeness. Of course they sent him a picture of her Sunday face, which was the most beautiful face in the world. As soon as he saw it he knew that this was not only the most beautiful face in the world, but the dearest. So he wrote to her father by the next post, applying for her hand in the usual way, and enclosing the most respectable references. The king told the princess.
"Come," said he, "what do you say to this young man?"
And the princess, of course, said, "Yes, please." So the wedding day was fixed for the first Sunday in June. But when the prince arrived with all his glorious following of courtiers and men-at-arms, with 2 pink peacocks and a crown case full of diamonds for his bride, he absolutely refused to be married on a Sunday. Nor would he give any reason for his refusal. And then the king lost his temper and broke off the match, and the prince went away. But he did not go very far. That night he bribed a page boy to show him which was the princess's room, and he climbed up by the jasmine through the dark rose-scented night and tapped at the window.
Who's there?
Said the princess inside in the dark.
"Me,"
said the prince in the dark outside.
Then it wasn't true,
said the princess.
They told me you'd ridden away.
What a cold you've got, my princess, said the prince, hanging on by the jasmine boughs.
It's not a cold,
sniffed the princess. Then, oh, you dear, were you crying because you thought I'd gone? He said.
I suppose so,
said she. He said, you dear, again, and kissed her hands.
Why wouldn't you be married on a Sunday?
She asked. It's the curse, dearest, he explained. I couldn't tell any one but you. The fact is, Malevola wasn't asked to my christening, so she doomed me to be, well, she said, moderately good-looking all the week, and too ugly for words on Sundays. So, you see, you will be married on a weekday, won't you?
But I can't,
said the princess,
because I've got a curse too, only I'm ugly all the week and pretty on Sundays.
How extremely tiresome, said the prince. But can't you be cured?
Oh, yes, said the princess, and told him how. And you, she asked, is yours quite incurable? Not at all, he answered. I've only got to stay under water for 5 minutes and the spell will be broken. But you see, beloved, the difficulty is that I can't do it. I've practised regularly from a boy, in the sea and in the swimming bath and even in my wash-hand basin. Hours at a time I've practised, but I never can keep under more than 2 minutes.
Oh dear, said the princess, this is dreadful.
It is rather trying, the prince answered.
You're sure you like me? She asked suddenly. Now you know that I'm only pretty once a week.
I'd die for you, said he.
Then I'll tell you what. Send all your courtiers away and take a situation as under gardener here. I know we want one. And then every night
I'll climb down the jasmine and we'll go out together and seek our fortune. I'm sure we shall find it.' And they did go out the very next night, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next, and the next. And they did not find their fortunes, but they got fonder and fonder of each other. They could not see each other's faces, but they held hands as they went along through the dark. And on the 7th night, as they passed by a house that showed chinks of light through its shutters, they heard a bell being rung outside for supper, a bell with a very loud and beautiful voice. But instead of saying, 'Supper's ready,' as any one would have expected, the bell was saying, 'Ding dong dell, I could tell where you ought to go to break the spell.' Then some one left off ringing the bell, so of course it couldn't say any more. So the two went on. A little way down the road a cow-bell tinkled behind the wet hedge of the lane, and it said not 'Here I am, quite safe,' as a cow-bell should, but 'Ding dong dell, all will be well if you.' Then the cow stopped walking and began to eat, so the bell couldn't say any more. The Prince and Princess went on, and you will not be surprised to hear that they heard the voices of 5 more bells that night. The next was a school bell. The schoolmaster's little boy thought it would be fun to ring it very late at night, but his father came and caught him before the bell could say any more than 'Ding-a-dong-a-dell, you can break up the spell by taking.' So that was no good. Then there were the 3 bells that were the sign over the door of an inn, where people were happily dancing to a fiddle because there was a wedding. These bells said, 'We are the merry 3 bells, bells, bells. You are 2 to undo spells, bells, spells.' Then the wind, who was swinging the bells, suddenly thought of an appointment he had made with a pine forest to get up an entertaining imitation of sea waves for the benefit of the forest nymphs who had never been to the seaside, and he went off. So of course the bells couldn't ring any more, and the Prince and Princess went on down the dark road. There was a cottage, and the Princess pulled her veil closely over her face, for yellow light streamed from its open door, and it was a Wednesday. Inside a little boy was sitting on the floor. Quite a little boy. He ought to have been in bed long before, and I don't know why he wasn't. And he was ringing a little tinkling bell that had dropped off a sleigh. And this little bell said, 'Tinkle, tinkle, tinkle, I'm a little sleigh bell, but I know what I know, and I'll tell, tell, tell. Find the enchanter of the ringing well. He will show you how to break the spell, spell, spell. Tinkle, 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 I'm a little sleigh bell, but I know what I know.' And so on, over and over, again and again, because the little boy was quite contented to go on shaking his sleigh bell for ever and ever. 'So now we know,' said the Prince. 'Isn't that glorious?' 'Yes, very. But where's the enchanter of the ringing well?' said the Princess doubtfully. 'Oh, I've got his address in my pocket book,' said the Prince. 'He's my godfather. He was one of the references I gave your father.' So the next night the Prince brought a horse to the garden, and he and the Princess mounted, and rode and rode and rode, and in the grey dawn they came to Wonderwood, and in the very middle of that the magician's palace stands. The Princess did not like to call on a perfect stranger so very early in the morning, so they decided to wait a little and look about them. The castle was very beautiful. decorated with a conventional design of bells and bell ropes carved in white stone. Luxuriant plants of American bell vine covered the drawbridge and portcullis. On a green lawn in front of the castle was a well, with a curious bell-shaped covering suspended over it. The lovers leaned over the mossy fern-grown wall of the well, and looking down they could see that the narrowness of the well only lasted for a few feet, and below that it spread into a cavern where water lay in a big pool.
"What cheer?"
said a pleasant voice behind them. It was the enchanter, an early riser like Darwin was, and all other great scientific men. They told him what cheer. "But," Prince Bellamant ended, "it's really no use. I can't keep under water more than 2 minutes, however much I try, and my precious Belinda's not likely to find any silly old bell that doesn't ring and can't ring and never will ring and was never made to ring."
"Ho, ho!"
laughed the enchanter, with the soft full laughter of old age.
"You've come to the right shop. Who told you?"
"The bells," said Belinda.
"Ah, yes."
The old man frowned kindly upon them. "You must be very fond of each other."
We are,
said the two together.
"Yes,"
the enchanter answered,
because only true lovers can hear the true speech of the bells, and then only when they're together. Well, there's the bell."
He pointed to the covering of the well, went forward and touched some lever or spring. The covering swung out from above the well, and hung over the grass grey with the dew of dawn.
"That?"
said Bellamant.
"That," said his godfather. "It doesn't ring, and it can't ring, and it never will ring, and it was never made to ring. Get into it."
"Eh?" said Bellamant, forgetting his manners. The old man took a hand of each and led them under the bell. They looked up. It had windows of thick glass, and high seats about 4 feet from its edge, running all round inside.
"Take your seats," said the enchanter.
Bellamant lifted his princess to the bench and leapt up beside her.
"Now," said the old man, "sit still, hold each other's hands, and for your lives don't move."
He went away, and next moment they felt the bell swing in the air. It swung round till once more it was over the well, and then it went down, down, down. "I'm not afraid with you," said Belinda, because she was, dreadfully. Down went the bell. The glass windows leapt into light. Looking through them, the two could see blurred glories of lamps in the side of the cave. Magic lamps, or perhaps merely electric, which, curiously enough, have ceased to seem magic to us nowadays. Then, with a plop, the lower edge of the bell met the water. The water rose inside it a little, then not any more, and the bell went down, down, and above their heads the green water lapped against the windows of the bell.
you're under water. If we stay 5 minutes,
Belinda whispered. "Yes, dear," said Bellamant, and pulled out his ruby-studded chronometer. "It's 5 minutes for you, but oh," cried Belinda, "it's now for me. For I found the bell that doesn't ring, and can't ring, and never will ring, and wasn't made to ring. Oh, Bellamant, dearest, it's Thursday. Have I got my Sunday face?" She tore away her veil, and his eyes, fixed upon her face, could not leave it. "Oh, dream of all the world's delight," he murmured, "how beautiful you are." Neither spoke again till a sudden little shock told them that the bell was moving up again. 'Nonsense,' said Bellamant, 'it's not 5 minutes.' But when they looked at the ruby-studded chronometer it was nearly 3/4 of an hour. But then, of course, the well was enchanted. 'Magic? Nonsense!' said the old man when they hung about him with thanks and pretty words. 'It's only a diving bell, my own invention.' So they went home and were married, and the Princess did not wear a veil at the wedding. She said she had had enough veils to last her time. And 1 year and a day after that a little daughter was born to them. 'Now, sweetheart,' said King Bellamant. He was king now, because the old king and queen had retired from the business, and were keeping pigs and hens in the country, as they had always planned to do. 'Dear sweetheart and life's love, I'm going to ring the bells with my own hands to show how glad I am for you and for the child, and for our good life together.' So he went out. It was very dark, because the baby princess had chosen to be born at midnight. The king went out to the belfry that stood in the great, bare, quiet, moonlit square, and he opened the door. The furry pussy bell ropes, like huge caterpillars, hung on the first loft. The king began to climb the curly-whirly stone stair, and as he went up he heard a noise, the strangest noises, stamping and rustling and deep breathings. He stood still in the ringer's loft, where the pussy-furry caterpillary bell ropes hung, and from the belfry above he heard the noise of strong fighting, and mixed with it the sound of voices angry and desperate, but with a noble note that thrilled the soul of the hearer like the sound of the trumpet in battle. And the voices cried, 'Down, down, away, away, when good has come, ill may not stay. Out, out, into the night, the belfry bells are ours by right.' And the words broke and joined again, like water when it flows against the piers of a bridge. 'Down, down, ill may not stay, good has come, away, away.' And the joining came like the sound of the river that flows free again. 'Out, out, into the night, the belfry bells are ours by right.' And then, as King Bellamant stood there, thrilled and yet, as it were, turned to stone by the magic of this conflict that raged above him, there came a sweeping rush down the belfry ladder. The lantern he carried showed him a rout of little dark evil people, clothed in dust and cobwebs, that scurried down the wooden steps, gnashing their teeth and growling in the bitterness of a deserved defeat. They passed, and there was silence. Then the king flew from rope to rope, pulling lustily, and from above the bells answered in their own clear, beautiful voices, because the good bell folk had driven out the usurpers and had come to their own again. Ring-a-ring-a-ring-a-ring-a-ring, ring bell, a little baby comes on earth to dwell. Ring bell, sound bell, sound swell, ring for joy and wish her well. May her life tell no tale of ill spell. Ring bell, joy bell, love bell, ring. 'But I don't see,' said King Bellamant, when he had told Queen Belinda all about it, 'how it was that I came to hear them. The enchanter of the ringing well said that only lovers could hear what the bells had to say, and then only when they were together.' 'You silly dear boy,' said Queen Belinda, cuddling the baby princess close under her chin. 'We are lovers, aren't we? And you don't suppose I wasn't with you when you went to ring the bells for our baby? My heart and soul, anyway. All of me that matters.' 'Yes,' said the King, 'of course you were. That accounts.